family. It's Miss Loretta coming to you today to discuss the book of Esther. First, let me say thank you for stopping by and allowing me a few minutes of your time. This book, the book of Esther, is very long. It's a very detailed story, but there's only two books of the Bible that are named after women, and I need to discuss those two. I'm going to discuss everything else, everybody else, in a video or two as we go, but today is Esther. Esther has 10 chapters, and it's in the Old Testament. Now, I know my glasses cause a glare, but if I don't have them, I really can't be of any use to anyone. But I'm going to take them off as much as possible. Okay, so Esther starts out, like I said, it's an Old Testament book, and it starts out with the king. The king, now when I read my Bible, I have the Layman's Bible. It's a parallel Bible, and it's layman's, and it basically breaks everything out in four different versions. As you see, I have four different versions of the Bible for each one. The versions I have: King James, New International, the Living Bible, and the New Revised Standard. So I just go from one to the other because they're just right here. And if I don't understand how something is written in one version, then I'll just look at the other version just to make sure I'm understanding everything that I'm reading. Okay, this starts out with the king, and I mentioned the different Bibles because in one version he's known as King Ahasuerus, 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 or King Xerxes, Xerxes, Xerxes. So he's the king of Persia. He has a queen. Her name is Vashti. There's also the new queen, because this is the story of a new queen. Her name is Esther, and the new queen, Esther, her family is Mordecai. Esther's parents have passed on. I'm not sure. She's an orphan. Not sure what the story is behind that, but she's an orphan. And Mordecai, a Jewish man, is the nephew of Esther's father. So he's the nephew, and her parents are gone, and I'm sure he must have been much older, of course. So he takes Esther in as his, and raises her as his daughter. Even though she's his little cousin, he raises her as his daughter. So they're Jewish. Then we also have Haman, who is the right hand, the guard, one of the officers in the guard for the king. And then we have Haman's wife, Zeresh. These are the main characters of the story. So here we go with the glasses. It starts out after the king had been king for 3 years. He decides to have this big, lavish party. He throws a banquet, festival, celebration, whatever you want to call it. This celebration included the people in the highest positions, because he's the king, and he's the king over 127 provinces. That's a lot. And all the people of importance attended this banquet in the provinces. The media was there, the military leaders of Persia, the nobles of the provinces of Persia, princes, and just all the officials, anyone who was anybody who was anyone, or anyone who was anybody, was at this party. Now get this banquet, this party lasted for 180 days, 6 months. A party lasting 6 months. Wow. So during this party, he had to, he was kind of a boastful type of guy. So he wanted to show off. So he was showing off his wealth of his kingdom, and the splendor and the glory of his majesty, and just this is my kingdom. This is who I am. Welcome. I mean, he wasn't stingy. He was generous. He gave gifts and, wine. And after the 6 month party, the 180-day party, he gave a 7 day banquet, which was just like a carry on after the party. So he gave the 7 day banquet. And after he had shown, all of his wealth, all of his riches, it was just nothing else, I guess, to talk about or to show them. I mean, in 6 months, what's left? So he decided on the last day of the party, since I guess he didn't have anything else to show, he wanted to show off his queen. So he told, now, back in the days of the king, you couldn't just go to the king, go before the king. You had to be summoned by him. And so he decides to summon the queen. Now, while he was throwing this party, and I'm not sure, but I know back in those days, they really separated men and women. They didn't all just hang together like they do today. It was more of a separation because, the men are actually in the power and everything. So it seems like this party was mainly a lot of men. But the second party, the second banquet he had after the 180 days, the 7 day banquet, was for everyone. It was held in the closed-in gardens of the palace courtyard, the second party. It was for everyone, the least to the greatest, all the people of the citadel of Susa, which is where his throne was. Now, while he was throwing his party, his queen Vashti was also throwing a little banquet. She was entertaining the women of the palace. So she's over here entertaining her people, having her little party. He's in his party, a little tipsy, because, he was drunk with wine. Let me read that to you. So it says, Queen Vashti gave, I'm going to read in the first chapter, starting at the 9th verse of Esther, Old Testament. So Queen Vashti gave a party for the women of the palace at the same time as his party was going on. And on the final day, when the king was feeling high, now this is the Living Bible version, when the king was feeling high and drunk and half drunk from wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who were his personal aides. Now he, had his little entourage, I guess like his top security people or his personal aides were these 7 eunuchs. And for him to summon the queen, he sent, there's a channel, a process that you have to go through. You don't just go say, hey, queen, come here, let me talk to you. He sent them to go get her for him. Went to her little party. Queen Vashti, the king is summoning you. Can I say that word? Summoning you to come and see him because he wanted to show off her beauty, for she was beautiful. She was beautiful. And it was just so many beautiful women back then. It is amazing. And it's so many beautiful women. It's just people today. It's just beautiful. But anyway, so he wanted to show off her beauty to all those folks that was at his little party. So he said, go get her and make sure she's got the royal crown on her head. Well, when they get over there, to get her, she said, but when the 12th verse says, but when they conveyed the emperor's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. Excuse me? She refused to come. Okay, now you can only go before the king when he summons you. And I'm sure he doesn't summons you very often or a whole lot, because there are concubines, and I don't know if he had other wives, but certainly concubines. And then the business of the palace, the business of being king, I'm sure he summoned her, when he was filling her or whatever. So, but she said no. How dare she? Now get this. Let me just read how this played out. Because, honey, when she said no, he was fit to be tied. He was angry. Excuse me? You said no. So he didn't know what to do. So what he did was, he first, in the 15th verse, it says, but first he consulted with his lawyers, for he did nothing without their advice. They were men of wisdom who knew the temper of the times as well as Persian law and justice, and the king trusted their judgment. These men were, now I'm going to try these names: Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Mears, Marsena, and Memucan, 7 high officials of Media Persia. They were his personal friends as well as being the chief officers of the government. So when she didn't come after he summoned her, like I said, he was hot as fish grease. Fish grease has to be hot for that fish to be right. So he was hot as fish grease. So he went and asked his lawyers and all these, his advisors, what we supposed to do? I mean, is there precedent for this? How do we handle this? So the chief officers, nobody was saying anything really. So he said, what shall we do about this situation? In verse, I can't even see these numbers. Okay, I'm still in 15. He said, what shall we do about this situation? He asked them. What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders properly sent through his aides? I sent these orders like I was supposed to through my people, and they went and told her to come. She didn't come. Okay, how do we handle this? Well, one of the aides, Memucan, in verse 16, Memucan answered for the others. He looked around and probably said, well, y'all ain't saying nothing. I'm going to say something. So Memucan said, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but every official and citizen of your empire. For women everywhere will begin to disobey their husbands when they learn what Queen Vashti has done. And before this day is out, the wife of every one of us officials throughout your empire will hear what the queen did and will start talking to us husbands the same way. And there will be contempt and anger throughout your realm. We suggest, subject to your agreement, you issue a royal edict, a law of the Medes and Persians that can never be changed, that Queen Vashti be forever banished from your presence, and that you choose another queen more worthy than she. Boy, that's hard. When this decree is published throughout your great kingdom, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will be respected by their wives. The king and all his aides thought this made good sense, so he followed Memucan's counsel and sent letters to all the provinces in all local languages, stressing that every man should rule his home and should assert his authority. Well, I really don't think you had to tell the men that they needed to run their home, but I guess it does make sense if the women find out that the queen doesn't even or isn't even obeying her husband, the king, who you should have to do what the king says, then they'll decide, well, we don't have to obey ours. They're not even kings. They're just regular old men. Some of them have authority, rank, whatever. Some of them don't. They're just regular old men. So if the queen ain't obeying hers, we not obeying ours. And they didn't want this to happen. So Memucan said, what you have to do, I guess make an example of the queen. Ban her from your presence. Never to see her again. She's no longer the queen. She's just, I guess now one of the concubines, or maybe just a wife, but not the wife. So he did that. Sounded good to him. Okay, let's do it. They did it. Well, a little while later, he was thinking about Queen Vashti, and he was like thinking, I'm never going to see her again. She's gone. She's been banished. I don't have a queen. So his aides, everyone around him, were like, well, why don't we get you another queen. Get all the virgins of the land, the beautiful women, young, beautiful women, and get them purified and, put them before you and see which one, you can choose for your new queen. So he said that sounded good. His aides told him about doing that. He said that sounded good. And so he decided to send out the plea, it pleased the king. So now there was a Jew in the citadel of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. Now Mordecai was a Benjamite, which is the tribe of Benjamin, which, as I said, we're going to discuss later in the 12 tribes of Israel, Israel being Jacob, who had 12 sons, and his 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. And his youngest son that he had by his favored wife, Rachel, was named Benjamin, and one of his tribe became the Benjamites. And Mordecai, they were Jewish. Mordecai was a descendant of the Benjamite tribe, or he was in the Benjamite tribe, the tribe of Benjamin. And so he actually had been carried away. He was the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away with King Jonah and Judah, whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had carried away. Anyway, Mordecai had ended up in this kingdom where King Ahasuerus was king and Vashti was queen, but now Vashti is no longer queen. I mentioned Mordecai, because Mordecai is going to play a pivotal role in this entire book. Mordecai was the cousin. Now, the new king, so since they have the new queen, right, they have to go and get a new queen. So while they're out gathering up the women to get them ready to try and get us a new queen, they go out in the land and gather the virgins, the beautiful women, and they run across Esther. Esther is beautiful. She's fair and beautiful. And that leads me to believe, because of her being fair and beautiful, they didn't realize she was Jewish. So, and not that she was beautiful, they didn't realize, but maybe she didn't have the characteristics of being a Jewish woman. So they just gathered her on up with the rest of the women and took them to the palace in an area where they would take I guess they had rooms for the concubines or what have you. And there was a man there who was the keeper of the women. So they took Esther. Now, as I said, Esther was beautiful. She was an orphan. Her parents had passed on, and her cousin, Mordecai, was a cousin of hers. Her father was his uncle. So when they passed on, he took her to be his daughter. And when they were taking her to go be in the group of women to be looked at for the next queen, he told her, don't tell them who you are, who your people are, who your kinfolks are. Basically, don't tell them I'm your kinfolk, because, that way they won't know you're Jewish. Because if they know you're Jewish, they may not want to pick you to be chosen to be the queen. So she didn't tell him. She did as Mordecai had said, because he raised her, and she'd always done, because he was like a father to her. So she was one of the girls. Now, when the man who was the keeper of the women, when he saw her, all the women coming through, everybody, but when he saw her, he favored her. Because as I said, she was beautiful. So he favored her. He gave her 7 handmaids to, take care of her every need. He gave her the best tent to live in while they were going through this 12-month process, because it was a 12-month process of purification, where 6 months they had to have the oil of myrrh, rub them down with the oil of myrrh for 6 months. And then the next 6 months, they had the ointments, the perfumes, the cosmetics, the hair, just everything. Getting them pure, because to be the queen, you have to be pure. You have to go through this purification process, lasted 12 months. And what would happen, once you completed your purification, then they would take, one at a time into the king's tent on a night, and that night you would go into his tent. Now, before you went, since you're in this purification process, when you get ready to go to the king, there's things in here that you can take to maybe help make the king more attracted to you. There, I don't know, perfumes. Maybe you could take you some perfume with you. You can take you maybe some ornaments for your hair, maybe some different clothing. Just, whatever that you can take advantage of to take with you to go to see the king that would make him maybe like you. So maybe he would choose you to be his queen. So the women did that. Now, what they would do was they would be led to, you just don't go anywhere by yourself. So they would be led to the king's tent, into it at night. And then the next morning, they would be led out of the tent and go to the next holding area, basically where the concubines were. And if the king decided he liked you or wanted you, he would call you by name to come back. And that's how he would choose his queen. Well, Miss Esther, when it was her time to go, now get this, they had to do this 12 months of purification, right? Well, Miss Esther, with her beautiful self and everything, she didn't have to do 12 months. She did 10 months. 10 months. And they were ready to send her on to see if the king decided that he wanted her. So she did her 10 months. And when it was time for her to go into the tent of the king, she, like I said, the other ladies took things with them to help the king maybe like them more. She didn't have to take anything. She just took the bare necessities, what the keeper of the women told her to take, just these few things, honey, because you're her, you're beautiful, so you don't really need anything. So she took the necessities, probably a pillow or something, I don't know, and went to the king's tent. So, someone led her there. It was her time. She went in. Well, the king fell in love with her. She was the one. She didn't get to leave the next morning or anything. He said, "This is my queen." For some reason, he really liked her. He put the royal throne upon her head, declared that she's my queen, threw a party. Baby, they really liked parties back then. Threw a party for her. They called it Esther's banquet or Esther's feast, depending on the translation you're reading. And she is the new queen. Esther is the queen. Well, now Mordecai is excited. He, this is his cousin / adopted daughter. So he's excited. Now, like I said, he's always in the gates of the palace, at the king's palace. So time went on after she became queen, and he was out in the palace gates, and there were two of the king's officers who were, tending the door, watching the door. And for some reason, they were really angry with the king. Now, they weren't for him, but they were angry, and they were plotting to do harm. They were plotting to unalive him. And this information was given to Mordecai, because like I said, he's always out there at the gates. So the information was given to him. With Esther being his relative, he decided, to let Esther know, to let the king know that there was a plot against him. So she, she couldn't go to him just herself. She had to, because, she couldn't go unless she was summoned. So she had one of her trusted people, after the people came to tell her what Mordecai said about the two guards, she had her people, she had all these maidservants. She had one of them go and tell the king what the plot was. And to make sure, she had them tell the king that Mordecai is the one who let her know, or is letting everyone know about this plot that's going on against the king. So they went ahead, investigated it. The king investigated and found out it was true. These two men, his two people that worked for him, were planning to harm him. So they went ahead, investigated, had the little trial, hung the men, they're gone. End of that. So we have the queen. We have a new queen. Her name is Esther. We have the king. We have Mordecai, the relative. The queen and her relative are Jews. And this is not made known yet. Okay, time goes on. Now, Haman comes into the picture. Haman, as I said, was one of the folks in his officials, his chamberlains is what they call it. I have a brother named Chamberlain, but his chamberlains. And so he decided to, oh, and let me go back. When Mordecai told of all of this, they have what they call, like, I guess, the history books. This was documented in the history books that, in the Chronicles, that Mordecai had let them know about this plot and, everything that happened. Both of the men were hanged. So it was written in the Chronicles and put in the history books for when we have to draw back on it later on. Okay, so after all this stuff had happened, Haman comes into the picture, his one of his officials, and he decides to promote Haman to like over everybody. So Haman is now going to be the one, when you see the king, you have to bow. But now when you see Haman, the king even wrote it in a decree. When they see Haman, they need to bow and show reverence and be scared in his presence because he's just somebody. But there was one who wasn't doing that. Everybody, when Haman passed by them, he was all, the man. But when Mordecai saw him, Mordecai was always at the gates of the palace. So when Haman would go in and out the palace, he'd have to see Mordecai. And Mordecai just kind of looked at him because Mordecai said, "I'm Jewish, honey. I bow to God." The end, period, point blank, period. However you say it. I always get stuff backwards, don't I? I bow to God. I'm not bowing to man. Don't care. Makes me no difference. Do whatever. And so the people would see this, everybody else bowing, but Mordecai's not. So, that was making Haman just real upset. And so he decided, he really wanted to harm him, but decided that he wouldn't. But they, people, chapter 3, verse 4 says, "Now it came to pass when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, but they told Haman." See, because every day the people was asking Mordecai, "Why won't you bow? I mean, you're supposed to bow. We have a decree." The king said, "Bow to Haman because he's impotent." And so to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them he was a Jew. That's what he said. I'm Jewish. I don't bow to other people. I bow to God. So in chapter 3, verse 5, let's read that. Haman was furious, but he decided not to lay hands on Mordecai alone, but to move against all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, and destroy all of them throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, throughout all of the king's kingdom. And so the most propitious time for this action was determined by throwing dice. So they decide, they want to kill everybody. And how we going to decide on how to do this? We're going to throw dice. You know how when you're trying to pick a number or something, throw the dice, and okay, so number 7, whatever. So they decide to throw dice, or it's also called pure, P-U-R. It's dice, pure, lots, all of that. Basically, we know it as throwing dice to figure out when we're going to destroy Mordecai and all of his people. So this was done in April of the 12th year of the reign of Ahasuerus, or the reign of the king, and February the following year was the date indicated. So they decided next year in February, we're going to kill all the Jewish people. Okay, I'm trying not to say that word. We're going to wipe out all the Jewish people. That's been done before, haven't it? Not so long ago. It's another story for a different day in a different video. So Haman now approached the king about the matter. So once they decided when we're going to do this, everything, so now he's got to go tell the king what was decided. Now, he's got to really kind of trick him, because who's going to agree to some mess like that, right? Go figure. So Haman now, in chapter 4, verse 8, Haman now approached the king about the matter. Now, this is how he told him, trying to get him to go along with this ridiculous thing they've come up with, which was to kill all the Jews. So the way he said it was, there's a certain race of people scattered through all the provinces of your kingdom, he began, and their laws are different from those of any other nation, and they refuse to obey the king's laws. Therefore, it is not in the king's interest to let them live. If it please the king, issue a decree that they be destroyed. And I will pay 20 million. Now, this is a 20 with 6 zeros behind it. That's 20 million, right? Okay. I will pay 20 million into the royal treasury for the expenses involved in this purge. So he's calling it a purge in the Living Bible translation. So he wants to purge the kingdom of these people who have their own laws, their own rules, and they don't abide by or bow down to the rules of the king. So let's get rid of them. Okay. Well, the king agreed. Chapter 10, verse 10 says the king agreed, confirming his decision by removing his ring from his finger and giving it to Haman. Now put a pin in that. We're coming back to that. By removing his ring from his finger and giving it to Haman, telling him, keep the money, but go ahead and do as you like with these people. So the king, I don't know what he was tripping on. He said, you know what? Okay, that's what you think. These people shouldn't be, in the kingdom. Go ahead and do what you want to with them. But you don't have to put the money in the trade. Keep your money. Just do it. Get her done. Whatever you think best is what he told them. Because, this is his new man in charge. And if Haman thinks that something needs to be done to these people or about these people, then the king is like, okay, go ahead and do it, and you got my permission. Here's my ring and for the seal. So 2 or 3 weeks later, Haman called in the king's secretaries and dictated letters to the governors and officials throughout the empire, to each province in its own languages and dialects. These letters were signed in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with his ring. So if it's signed in his name and the ring he gave Haman was sealed with the ring, then it has to be right. They were then sent by messengers into all the provinces of the empire, decreeing that the Jews, young and old, women and children, must all be eliminated on the 28th day of February of the following year, and their property given to those who eliminated them. A copy of this edict, the letter stated, must be proclaimed as law in every province and made known to all your people so that they will be ready to do their duty on the appointed day. So, the appointed day, according to the Living Bible, was February 28th of next year. So, between now and that time, we've got to get this edict out to everyone. All the people in all the lands, we got to write it in the language they speak. So when they receive this, they'll know what's going on. And they got until the 28th. So they'll be ready to do their duty on the appointed day. And the appointed day was the day they were going to get rid of the Jewish people. So they had to get this out to everyone so they would know when, so they would be ready. The edict went out by the king's speediest couriers. Baby, they had to get that letter on out there. Back then it took a while to get everything. So if we want to be ready to handle this by the 28th of February, we got to get it on out. It was sent out by the king's speediest couriers after being first proclaimed in the city of Shushan, which the citadel of Shushan, where the king's throne was. Then the king and Haman sat down for a drinking spree as the city fell into confusion and panic. Okay. So you made this stupid decree, you and your people, Mr. Haman, by casting lots, shooting dice, whatever, deciding, okay, pick a day, okay, just playing with people's lives, right? So we picked the day of the 28th. So this is the day. Now I got to go over here and convince the king. So go over here, tell the king, these folks out here doing whatever they want to, not showing any whatever for your leadership. So we need to get rid of them. The king said, okay. So, and then Haman, like I said, was going to put $20 million in the treasury to go ahead and help take care of getting rid of these people. But, he was like, no, we don't need to do that. We'll go ahead and just do what you feel like you should do. He took off his little ring to gave him, I guess when you sign something, you put the little ring seal on it and that makes it official, whatever. So he took his ring off, gave it to him because, it was going to have a lot of paperwork, whatever going to have to be done. So he needed the ring to do all of this. Okay. Now, after we got it all taken care of, the letters all written, they headed out. Me and the king, we're going to go sit down and have us a drinking spree. We're going on a bender now that we've, got everybody in the land terrified, or all the Jewish people in the land terrified. Okay. So when Mordecai, chapter 4, now that the stuff is spreading, 4 verse 1, when Mordecai learned what had been done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the city crying with a loud and bitter wail. Then he stood outside the gate of the palace, for no one was permitted to enter in mourning clothes. So he had to stand outside the gates. Now, normally, he's inside the gates just hanging out around the palace. But now that he has on his mourning, 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 because he's mourning the news that the Jews are going to be destroyed. So he has on his mourning clothes with sackcloth and ashes, so he can't go inside the palace gates. So people see him, hear him, the crying and the wailing, and the news or the word gets back to Esther, Queen Esther, that Mordecai is out in the gates carrying on like this. Now, mind you, they still don't know that she's a Jew, that she's a kindred of Mordecai, but she's a queen, so they tell the queen what's going on, and they tell her Mordecai's walking in the streets, mourning, crying, wailing, and so she doesn't know what's going on because they haven't run it past her, this decree and anything. They don't have to. She's a queen. She's not in charge of anything, so they don't run it past her. But her people find out what's wrong with Mordecai, and they go and tell her. And, tell her that he's out there wailing and crying and in mourning clothes. So she sends clothes out to him. I guess maybe to have him put something on so he can come inside the gate and talk, maybe get word to her, some kind of way talk to her so she can find out what's wrong. This is her kindred. They haven't really been in contact because she's now queen and he's a Jew. So she sends the clothes out there, but he refuses. He's just, oh my God, he's just, done. So they come back in and tell her he refused the clothes. So she sends them back out there to ask, what is wrong? What is going on with you? And, since he can't come in any kind of way and talk to her, so he sent her people out to find out why he was acting like that. So verse 6 in chapter 4 says, so Hathach, Hathachach, I just can't pronounce it. Hathach went out to the city square and found Mordecai just outside the palace gates. And he heard the whole story. So that from him, Mordecai told him everything that was going on. He told him about the 20 million Haman had promised to pay the king's treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave Hathach a copy of the king's decree that was dooming all the Jews, and he told him to show it to Esther and tell her what was happening, and that she should go to the king and plead for her people. So the servant returned to Esther and gave her Mordecai's message. And Esther told him, go back and say to Mordecai, verse 11, all the world knows that anyone, whether man or woman, who goes into the king's inner court without his summons is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. So if you go in there and he sees you and he doesn't hold out his scepter for you to come in, that means you die if he doesn't do that. And the king, okay, holds out his gold scepter, and the king has not called for me to come to him in more than a month. So, like I said, you only go before the king when he summons you. And like I said previously with Vashti, I'm sure he didn't summons her very often or all the time. So when he does summons you, you need to come. And like Esther just said here, her being the new queen, he hadn't summoned her in over a month. So she wasn't gonna just jump out and go and say, "Hey, king," without being summoned, because she could die just like everybody else. Even though she's a queen, she could still die if he don't hold out that scepter and say, "Come on up here and tell me what's on your mind." So Hatshai gave the message to Mordecai, that he hadn't summoned her in a month, so she wasn't thinking she was going to be going over there. So this was Mordecai's reply to Esther. Now, this is what we hear all the time when you hear someone refer to you're in a place, a time, a period, or whatever for such a time as this. Well, hold on, such a time as this. Okay, verse 14. So the reply was, "This is what Mordecai told her. If you keep quiet at a time like this, God will deliver the Jews from some other source, but you and your relatives will die. What's more, who can say but that God has brought you into the place for just such a time as this?" Meaning, all of that. So if we go back to the things that transpire in the book of Esther from the beginning, it's orchestrated by God. He's strategic in his orchestration of things. We didn't know when the king was feeling himself after 3 years that he wanted to throw this big party and tell everybody. It was just normal business as usual before this party happened. Everything was just going. But see, God knew that Haman somehow, because he knows the end from the beginning, he knew Haman was going to come up with this ridiculous idea to wipe out his people. So I'm sure he turned the heart of Vashti when they were sent to get her, when she was summoned by the king, turned her heart for her to say no. Because who does that? Who says no when the king says for you to come? Well, Miss Vashti did. So I believe he turned her heart so that she wouldn't go, so that she would no longer be queen, and then placed Esther, her beauty and all of her feminine wiles, I guess you would say, so she would be in the group of people who were chosen to see if they could be queen. God is orchestrating this. So then she was chosen as queen, her being a Jewish woman in this position, in one of the highest positions of the land, when this ridiculous plot was orchestrated by Haman. Now, with her being in the position, he has placed her there for such a time as this. So this nut cannot make this happen. Okay, I hope you got that. Glasses back on. So he told her, you may have been put here for such a time as this. So she thought about it, and, because God will prevail. If you want to do what he asks you to do, you can. Jonah in Nineveh, in the belly of the whale. He told you to go preach to those people, but now you're trying to go somewhere else, and now you end up swallowed, not the way of the fish. You end up swallowed by the fish. But we see you still, when that fish let you go, you still ran over there to do what he told you to do, right? Okay, Esther, you were put in this position. Basically, we may as well just look at it like it is. You were put in this position by God. So when Haman came up with this ridiculous plot, you would be there to try or to save his people. She is the Savior Queen, people. She was put there to be the Savior Queen. So she said, okay, let's do this. In 15, Esther said, "Tell Mordecai, Go gather all together all the Jews of Shushan and fast for me. You know, to wait the way, one of the ways to really move God and get what you want answered, or to get what you want revealed to you or what have you, is to fast and pray. So she told him, go and gather together all the Jews of Shushan and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my maids will do the same. And then, though it is strictly forbidden, I will go in to see the king. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai did as Esther told him to do. So finally she said, probably looked at it like, well, if I don't ask the king to save my people, like Mordecai said, God's going to have this done. It'll just be through someone else. And then that someone else, I may get caught up in it, and maybe some of my people will be wiped out, and I could be one of them. So it's going to be done anyway. I may as well go ahead and do what I can do. So she told all of him, get all the Jews to fast 3 days, 3 nights. She was getting all her people that work with her in the palace, her maid servants, handmaids, or whatever, her people, eunuchs, whoever's with her, we're all going to fast for 3 days and 3 nights. The fast back in the Bible days was a fast of no food, no water for 3 days and 3 nights, or ever how long you proclaim the fast to be, 40 days, 40 nights, whatever, but it was no food and no water. Now, these days, of course, we fast differently. We fast from social media. We fast from relationships. We fast from watching television. We fast from drinking, from eating chocolate, from eating meat. The Bible day fast was you ate nothing, you drank nothing. So they went on this fast for 3 days, 3 nights, all the Jews, before she went before the king to ask him, to plead with him to save her people. So the way she did it was, after the 3 days passed, she put on her royal robes in chapter 5. She put on her royal robes and entered the inner court just beyond the royal hall of the palace. Not all the way in. She was just kind of on the outside, kind of peeping to see if, he would beckon for her. Where the king was sitting up on his royal throne. And when he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court, he welcomed her, holding out the golden scepter to her. So Esther approached and touched its tip. So he held it out. She walked over there and touched the tip of his scepter. That meant he received her. Then the king asked her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half of the kingdom." And Esther replied, "If it please your majesty, I want you and Haman to come to a banquet I have prepared for you today." The king turned to his aides. "Tell Haman to hurry," he said. So the king and Haman came to Esther's banquet. So this is how she did it. She didn't just, when he summoned her to come on in and talk to him, she didn't just go in and say, well, this decree has been passed, you passed it, and it's to, because he doesn't know that Esther is Jewish, that the Jewish that he's about to allow to be wiped out are Esther's people. He doesn't know this at this time. So she gets this banquet. I'm not going to just tell him right off. I'm going to go ahead and invite him to this banquet. So, and him and Haman, because she knows that Haman was behind all of this. So she's just going to take this 1-2 steps at a time. So they came to Esther's banquet. During the wine course, the king said to Esther, "Now tell me what you really want, and I will give it to you, even if it's half of the kingdom." Now get this. Esther replied, so she kind of smart, She replied, "My request, my deepest wish, is that if your majesty loves me and wants to grant my request, that you come again with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I shall prepare for you, and tomorrow I will explain what this is all about." So she's like, okay, I'm not going to tell you right now what it is I want. It's getting a little warm. What it is I want. But if you come to my banquet tomorrow, you and Haman again, then that's when I'm going to tell you what I want. So they had a little banquet, and had a little nice time, but didn't get anything really accomplished. Now, get this. After the queen has invited him, it was just him and the king at her little banquet. Baby, in the fifth chapter, the ninth verse, after the banquet, Haman went out. What a happy man Haman was as he left the banquet. But when he saw Mordecai there at the gate, remember Mordecai is the Jewish man who's always at the gates of the palace. He's always inside the gate. But he saw Mordecai there at the gate, not standing up or trembling before him. So he coming out of the palace, because like I said, every time he go back and forth from the palace to the gates out and everything, he got to see Mordecai, because Mordecai is always just there in the gates. And so when he saw him and he wasn't trembling before him, he was furious. But, however, he restrained himself and went on home and gathered together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, and boasted to them about his wealth and his many children and promotions the king had given him, and how he had become the greatest man in the kingdom next to the king himself. So he was a big man on campus now, next to the king. Of course, the king is the king, but now Haman was next to the king. He was running things also. But then he delivered his punchline. Yes, and Esther is the queen and invited only me and the king himself to the banquet she prepared for us. And tomorrow we are invited again. But yet, he added, all this is nothing when I see Mordecai the Jew just sitting there in front of the king's gate, refusing to bow to me. Hey, that just worried him. Everybody else is bowing, but this man just will not bow. Well, suggested Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends, get ready a 75-foot high gallows, and in the morning ask the king to let you hang Mordecai on it. Okay. And the king, and when this is done, you can go on your merry way with the king to the banquet. This pleased Haman immensely, and he ordered the gallows built. So his wife said, if it bothers you so much that Mordecai doesn't bow to you and doesn't reverence you when he sees you, then just have this gallows built and tell the king to let you hang Mordecai on it. Just like that. Just, he won't bow, hang him, because he's not obeying the law of the king. So I guess rightfully, maybe he had a right to. So that idea was great and made him happy. So he said, okay, that's what we'll do. We'll go ahead and put Mordecai on, hang him. Well, so that night, now remember I told you to put a pin in those chronicles back there? Well, that night, the king had trouble sleeping and decided, he wanted to get up and just do some reading because he couldn't sleep. He ordered the historical records of his kingdom from the library, and in them, he came across the item telling how Mordecai had exposed the plot of the two guards, which was Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, watchmen that were at the palace gates, had plotted to assassinate him. That had happened a little while ago, and remember, Mordecai got the news to Esther that these two guys were trying to do harm to the king, and then Esther got the information to the king through her people and made sure they told the king that Mordecai is the one who let them know about this plot. And remember, the guys were hanged. So he read about this again. He had forgot all about it. It was just something that happened. They went on. So he said in verse 3 of chapter 6, what reward did we ever give Mordecai for this? The king asked. His couriers replied, nothing. because he couldn't sleep. So when he's up, they're up. So he had people around him still, because they have to make sure the king is always okay. So he asked, what reward do we give him? They said nothing. And they said, the king said, who is on duty in the outer court? Because I guess he wanted to do something. So he was going to ask, his officers, anyone that was out there in the court, what can we do? So who was on duty? Now, it just so happened that Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to hang Mordecai. Remember, his wife and them suggested that he hang Mordecai since he didn't like how he did not reverence him. And so he decided to go up to the palace to tell the king about this idea. So when he was going to do that, King can't sleep, just read in his little book, his history books about what Mordecai did, decided that he didn't get a reward. So I need to reward him. So who is out there that I can talk to about this? And like I said, just so happened, Haman was out there. So they told him Haman is out there. So in verse 5, at the end of the verse, he said, bring him in, the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, now get this. I tell you, Haman was kind of full of himself, y'all. The king said, what should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? Because, the king wanted to do something for Mordecai. He didn't know what, so he wanted to get someone. He's always getting the counsel of others. I guess he just didn't want to make decisions all willy-nilly on his own, like, we won't even call any names. So he asked his head man, he promoted him to head man, what shall I do to honor someone who pleases me? So here we go, y'all. Haman thought to himself, whom would he want to honor more than me? He already promoted him to this highest rank. And so Haman didn't remember anything that had happened recently. So if the king wants to honor someone, he must want to honor me, right? And that kind of makes sense to me because, nothing had happened that anyone needed to be honored here recently. And nobody was thinking about that Mordecai stuff back then. So he replied, bring out. Now, this is what Haman told him to do for the man he wanted to honor. Bring out some of the royal robes the king himself has worn, and the king's own horse, and the royal crown, and instruct one of the king's most noble princes to robe the man and lead him through the streets of the king on the king's own horse, shouting before him, this is the way the king honors those who truly please him. Now get that. All of that stuff he said to do because he was thinking that if the king was going to honor someone, of course, it was him that he was going to honor. So he thought about all these wonderful things that you could do for the man that's going to be honored. And since he was thinking it was going to be himself, oh, honey, the king's own horse, let him have robes that the king wore, let the highest person lead him through the town, talking about this is what the king does to those he honors. So Haman laid it all out. Sound good to me? Did it sound good to y'all? So, excellent, the king said to Haman, hurry and take these robes and my horse and do just as you have said to Mordecai, the Jew, who works at the chancellery. Follow every detail you have suggested. Because those were some great details, to do all that for someone. But to Haman's surprise, the king said, yes, an excellent idea. I agree with all that. Sounds beautiful. So go do all that you have said. Don't leave anything out. Do all of that for Mordecai. Can you imagine Haman? How he must have felt after when the king said, go do this for Mordecai. I bet Haman said, say what now? Who? Say who? Go do this for Mordecai? But the king said it. Sounded good to him. Matter of fact, he said excellence. Oh, my hair. So then Haman had to do it. Haman had to do it. He had to go and do all these things that the king said. Afterwards, Mordecai returned to his job, but Haman hurried home utterly humiliated. When he had to do all of that, because he was the high guard, he said, the highest one, he said, have him led through the streets by one of the high guards, him telling the people this is what the king does for someone he honors. Great. So he did that. So that humiliated him. So he went on home just humiliated. And he told his wife Zeresh and all his friends what had happened. They said, if Mordecai is a Jew, and if Mordecai is a Jew, you will never succeed in your plans against him. To continue to oppose him will be fatal. While they were still discussing it with him, the king's messengers arrived to conduct Haman quickly to the banquet Esther had prepared. So all of this happened after the first banquet when he was leaving to go home, and he saw Mordecai and went home, and told everybody, he wouldn't bow before him. They devised this plan. He was going back to the palace to tell the king about the plan. In the meantime, the king couldn't sleep, so he started reading the history books, decided that incident with Mordecai, how he saved his life. He wanted to honor him. So when they decided that they were going to hang Mordecai, he was going back to the palace to tell the king, or to get the king on board with this plan. But the king had decided that he wanted to honor Mordecai. And of course, Haman didn't know that. So when the king was asking Haman, what should he do for someone who he wants to truly honor, Haman gave him this, detail of what he thought should be done, because Haman thought he was doing it to him, but he wasn't. So he said, great, that sounds good. Do all that to Mordecai. So Haman had to go and do that to Mordecai, lead him through the streets. So after that happened, he was just humiliated, went home and told his folks. And while he was telling them everything that happened, the king's people, it's the next day, they came and got him to take him, because remember, Esther had planned a second banquet. Now, at this second banquet, it was just again the king and Haman. And at this second banquet, he asked her again, what is it that I can do for you? So she told him that there is a man or a person that is going to, let me just read it. Okay, the royal secretaries, they get it together. Okay, so after they had got the second banquet, as I said, they were doing the second banquet, right? Okay, for the second banquet, now we'll go to chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman came to Esther's banquet again during the wine course. The king asked her, what is your petition, Queen Esther? What do you wish? Whatever it is, I will give it to you, even if it is half of my kingdom. Here we go. And at last, Esther replied, if I have won your favor, O king, and if it please your majesty, save my life and the lives of my people. For I and my people have been sold to those who will destroy us. We are doomed to destruction and slaughter. If we were only to be sold as slaves, perhaps I could remain quiet, though even there would be incalculable damage to the king that no amount of money could begin to cover. What are you talking about? King Ahasuerus demanded. Who would dare touch you? Because she's like, I and my people, and he's thinking, you're the queen. What are you talking about? Who would harm the queen? My queen, So Esther replied, this wicked Haman is our enemy. Now, Haman is sitting right there at the little banquet. It's just the king and Haman. And she's talking about sparing or saving her people. He don't understand who could even be wanting to harm her or her people because she's his queen. And she said, the wicked Haman is our enemy. You know, he was like, huh? Then Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. The king jumped to his feet and went out into the palace garden as Haman stood up to plead for his life to Queen Esther. For he knew that he was doomed. In despair, he fell upon the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king returned from the palace garden. So he heard all of this, and he's like, he couldn't believe it. So he decides he just got to go outside and think, you have to go take a little walk. So he had to go outside in the garden and like, what? And so he decides to walk back in there. In the meantime, Haman stayed in there because he knew he was about to be out of here. So he wanted to try to, change Esther's mind, try to say, look, Queen, I'm sorry. However he was doing, he was trying to plead for his wife. And then just as the king was coming back in from outside, Haman fell up on the couch where the queen was. So I guess she was just sitting there, and he, trying to plead. He fell up on the couch. And the king says, will he even assault her right here in the palace before my very eyes? Because he didn't know he was outside. He came in. He thought Haman was trying to get his woman. So the king roared instantly. The death veil was placed over Haman's face. And then one of the king's aides said, Sir, Haman just ordered a 75-foot gallows constructed to hang Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. It stands in Haman's courtyard. Hang Haman on it, the king ordered. So when he came back in there and thought that Haman was trying to, assault his queen, he lost it. So he screamed, would you even try to assault my queen? And then, of course, the guards, because they always, his people right there beside him, heard. So they ran in there and they put a veil over his face, the death veil. They put that veil over his face. And he was like, well, what do I need to do with him? They said, well, he built this gallows that he was going to hang Mordecai on. Mordecai, the one who prevented the assassination of you. And King was like, hang him on it. He built it, hang him on it. Now, see, that tells you, the song says, if you dig one ditch, you better dig two, 'cause the trap you set just might be for you. And it just so happens the trap he set for Mordecai happened to be for him. So be careful when you're out there digging ditches, trying to put people in the different ditches. Be careful that you don't end up yourself in it. So he ended up hung on the same gallows he was going to hang Mordecai on. So then that was over. Haman was now dead, or out of the picture, we'll say. So still, with that happening, he was out of the picture. And then that same day, the king gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman. So, he was the high man next to the king. So he, I guess, had an estate, of his own. So when they got rid of him, the king gave Esther his estate. And so then the king took off his gave Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So when he found out, that this plot that Haman had, Esther then had to go ahead and tell the king that she was Jewish and that Mordecai was her cousin / adopted father. And then she reminded him, Mordecai is the one who stopped the plot for your assassination. So what he did, the king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman. From Haman. Now, remember, I told you, y'all forgive my dog. He's not getting enough attention. So I told you that the king had taken off the signet ring, or I guess it's like a signing ring, had taken it off and given it to Haman to send out, to make sure all the letters and things going out to the people to get rid of the Jews was sealed with his ring so they would know it came from the king. So he took the ring back from him before he got rid of him. So what he did was, okay, so he took his ring off and gave it to Mordecai and presented it to him. And then Esther appointed Mordecai over Haman's estate. I mean, Esther didn't need it. She was a queen. She had the palace. So since the king gave her Haman's estate, she gave it over to Mordecai. So Mordecai became wealthy in this land. But still, even though, Haman was gone, that decree that the king had approved to go out, that all the Jews were to be wiped out, on the 28th day of February was still out there in the land. Just because Haman was gone, this wasn't rescinded. So Esther again, in chapter 8, verse 3, Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite. Mordecai was a Benjamite, Haman was an Agagite, which he had devised. Well, the plan which he had devised, okay. He told, plan which he had devised. Okay, y'all, come on, against the Jews. Woo, sorry, y'all. When you got 3 different versions, the international is where I am, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther. She arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and think it is the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman's son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? In other words, she said, you need to put a stop to that, because I can't sit here and watch my people, my family, be destroyed. So the king replied to Esther and to Mordecai, the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews, as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. So he told him, write another one and, say whatever you need to say, and we'll go ahead, because we need to get this canceled. So in verse 9, at once the royal secretaries were summoned on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, and the month, which is the month of Sivan, Sivan. They wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, the governors, everybody, the 127 provinces, everybody, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. In other words, they sent out a new order signed by the king's ring to everybody in their language, everybody of the provinces in their language, and dispatched it with the king's horses, and especially bred it for the kings. They sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king, because they needed to get this on out. Don't know what time of the year it was, how close they were getting to this date, but they had to get the information out there. Rescinded, is revoked, we're not doing this anymore, basically, is what he was trying to get out to the people. Okay, so the king's edict, the one he just did, granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or any province that might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces and the king of Xerxes or Ahasuerus was the 13th day. Now, in the New International Version, it says it's the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. In the Living Bible, it says the day chosen for this throughout all the provinces of the king of Ahasuerus was the 28th day of February. It further stated that a copy of this decree, which must be recognized everywhere as law, would be ready and prepared to overcome their enemies. Broadcast to all the people that the Jews would be ready and prepared to overcome their enemies. So the mail went out swiftly, carried to the couriers and all that. Then Mordecai put on the royal robes of blue and white and the great crown of gold with an outer cloak of fine linen and purple, and went out from the presence of the king through the city streets filled with shouting people. And the Jews had joy and gladness and were honored everywhere and in every city and province. As the king's decree arrived, the Jews were filled with joy and had great celebration and declared a holiday. And many of the people of the land pretended to be Jews, for they feared what the Jews would do to them. So it was just a celebration going out throughout the land. We're no longer going to be wiped out on this particular day. We're really glad of that. Thank you. So on the 28th day, this day that they were supposed to be wiped out, the day the two decrees of the king were put into effect, the day of the Jews' enemies, the day the Jews' enemies had hoped to vanquish them, though it turned out quite the contrary. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the king's provinces to defend themselves against those who might try to harm them. But no one tried, because even though this went out throughout the land that they were not to be destroyed, still it may have been some people somewhere who may still be trying to do this. So they had permission to defend themselves against anyone who might try to harm them. And, like I said, no one tries, for they were greatly feared, because the king is saying this, so y'all must be somebody. So they're now afraid. And it was the rulers of the provinces, the governors, the officials, the aides, all of them helped the Jews for fear of Mordecai. For Mordecai was a mighty name in the king's palace, and his fame was known throughout all the provinces. He had become more and more powerful. So now Mordecai, the Jew, was somebody in the king's palace. But the Jews went ahead on that appointed day and slaughtered their enemies. Now, even though no one was coming for them, on that day, they just turned it around and they went after their enemies. They even, I'm trying not to say certain words, I think you can tell, right? But they even got rid of, we'll say, 500 men in Shushan, the place where they lived, not just in the land, but right there in the citadel of Shusha. They got rid of 500 people there. And it was also the 10 sons of Haman too, because Haman had 10 sons. And in thinking about this chapter, I think about the sins of the father. Now, his 10 sons were minding their own business, doing their own thing or whatever, but because their father was just fit to be tied when he saw Mordecai and Mordecai not bowing, then he decides to make this decree, and the sons don't even have anything to do with it. But because of their father, they were punished. His 10 sons were also caught up in all of this, and they were wiped out because of their father. And it names them, though I can't say those names, I'm sorry. So they wiped them out, but they did not try to take Haman's property. Late that evening, when the king was informed of the number of those slain in Shushan, he called Queen Esther. The Jews have gotten rid of 500 men in Shushan alone, he exclaimed, and also Haman's 10 sons. If they have done that here, I wonder what has happened in the rest of the provinces. But now, what more do you want? It will be granted unto you. Tell me and I will do it. Now, after he's, gotten rid of all of that, did all this for Esther, he's still saying, what else do you want done? I'll even do that. So Esther said, if it please your majesty, let the Jews who are here at Sushan do it again tomorrow, as they have done today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. So they did that the one day that they were supposed to be destroyed. They destroyed their enemies, over 500, and then 10 sons of him. So he's still trying to say, well, what else can I do for you, my queen? And she said, what they just did today in destroying their enemies, let them do it again tomorrow, so they can go ahead and just really get rid of all their enemies. And the king agreed. So the king agreed, and the decree was announced at Sushan, which is the citadel of Susha, and they hung up the bodies of Haman's 10 sons. Then the Jews at Sushan gathered together the next day and also wiped out 300 more men, though again they took no property. Now they weren't killing and plundering, and taking property. They were just getting rid of their enemies. We don't even want what you got, what you've acquired, we don't even want that. What we want is just you gone. So that's what they did. They got them gone. Good English, right? So meanwhile, the other Jews throughout the king's provinces had gathered together and stood for their lives and destroyed all their enemies, getting rid of, the K word, getting rid of 75,000 of those who hated them. That's a lot of people. But they did not take their goods. Again, they're not plundering. They're just getting rid of their enemies. So they left their stuff. Throughout the provinces, this was done on the 28th day of February, and the next day they rested, celebrating their victory with feasting and gladness. But the Jews of Sushan went on getting rid of their enemies the second day also, and then rested the next day with feasting and gladness. And so it is that the Jews in the unwalled villages throughout Israel to this day have an annual celebration of the second day when they rejoice and send gifts to each other. So they still do that today. I'm not familiar, but I'm going to try and learn something about this. But it says Mordecai in the 20th verse of the 9th chapter, Mordecai wrote a history of all these events and sent letters to the Jews near and far throughout all the king's provinces, encouraging them to declare an annual holiday on the last 2 days of the month. So they made it a holiday. And the holiday is, celebrate with feasting and gladness and giving gifts. These historic days when the Jews were saved from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned to gladness and their mourning into happiness. Though that is what they're celebrating these 2 days, that they were down when that decree went out that they were to be wiped out. That had to, be hard to handle. I mean, they're telling you that you have a actual date. Of course, we all must go, but we don't know when. And to have a stamped date on your day had to be, something for them. And then not knowing how, because if they said it was going to happen, if the king said it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So not knowing how this is going to turn out, because as God knows the end from the beginning, you don't. So all you know is what they said was going to happen. So now we're stressed out about it. So on this day, the holiday, the last 2 days of the month, they celebrated this. They set this up to celebrate with feasting, gladness, and the giving of gifts. These historic days when the Jews were saved from their enemies. This is when the Jews were saved from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned to gladness and their mourning into happiness. So they still celebrate that to this day. Now, and the whole thing, and it just goes to talk about the whole thing, how it came about. And actually, if you You can tell anyone who may be reading this, if they just want to get the gist of it, they can start here at 1:24, 1 hour and 24 minutes into it. Chapter 23 of the Living Bible, verse 9 says, "So the Jews adopted Mordecai's suggestion and began the annual custom. As a reminder of the time when Haman, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted to destroy them at the time determined by a throw of the dice, and to remind them that when the matter came before the king, he issued a decree causing Haman's plot to boomerang, and he and his sons were hanged on the gallows. That is why the celebration is called Purim, Purim, because the word for throwing dice in Persian is pur. All the Jews throughout the realm agreed to inaugurate this tradition and to pass it on to their descendants and to all who became Jews. They declared they would never fail to celebrate these 2 days at the appointed time each year. It would be an annual event from generation to generation, celebrated by every family throughout the countryside and the cities of the empire, so that the memory of what had happened would never perish from the Jewish race. Meanwhile, Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail and later adopted by Mordecai the Jew, had written a letter throwing full support behind Mordecai's letter inaugurating this annual feast of Purim. In addition, letters were sent to all the Jews throughout the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with messages of goodwill and encouragement to confirm that these 2 days annually as the Feast of Purim, decreed by both Mordecai the Jew and by Queen Esther. Indeed, the Jews themselves had decided upon this tradition as a remembrance of the time of their national fasting and prayer. So the commandment of Esther confirmed these dates, and it was recorded as law. They recorded this time. This went down in the history books, and it sounds like it's still celebrated today. We're probably going to have to do that, but that's another video for another day. Another story for another video for another day. Anyway, so lastly, I'm going to read you the 10th chapter. So now you see everything that's going on. I hope I've presented this in a way that's understandable. I know it was very long. I'm so sorry. It's going to be an hour and 30 minutes long. Bear with me. Lastly, King Ahasuerus laid tribute to the land and on the islands of the sea. All the acts of his power and might, and full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the annals of the kings of Media and Ahasuerus? As he was powerful among the Jews and popular with many kindred, for he sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all of his descendants. That is Mordecai. He was raised to prime minister. He went from no one, a Jew who had been taken to this land through capture and all of that, and he went to be next, the highest in the land, next to the king. He was the prime minister. I hope you've enjoyed. This is the entire book of Esther. If you were ever confused, you know that she was chosen for such a time as this. That time was to save her people from the destruction that was plotted by one man who took it upon himself to decide to wipe out a whole race of people. Does that kind of sound familiar? Like back in the day of the man's name that starts with an H. We won't say his name. Or in today, the man's name that starts with an E. But you know what? We will not get into any of that, at least not at this time. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like, subscribe, and set a notification. And I would really love it if you would share it with someone who you think has an hour and a half to sit down and listen to me. Thank you, guys. Thank you for stopping by. I do love you. And why do I still have these glasses on? Thank you for stopping by. I do hope you look at the other videos on the channel. I'm trying to make all of this as simple as possible. Thank you again. Bye. Be blessed. Bye.